Hi, I'm Joe McGuire. Welcome to Connecticut Politics TV as we continue our five-part series on media literacy. My first guest, and one of three that we'll have here this afternoon, is Barth Keck. He's in his 32nd year as an English teacher and his 18th year as an assistant football coach at Haddam-Killingworth High School in Killingworth, Connecticut. He teaches courses in journalism, media literacy, and AP language and composition. He's one of my favorite op-ed writers in Connecticut News Junkie. You could follow this guy on Twitter at KeckB33. Barth, appreciate you being back. Media literacy, it's kind of your thing, at least for me it is. So I appreciate you coming back. We got a series that we're going to be conducting here, and it all sparks from, and this is super interesting, and how you all got pulled into this, Barth. The Media and Me, a guide to critical media literacy for young people. And you had a Twitter relationship with Ben Boyington, who was one of the co-authors of this book. And so we had the both of you on. I thought we had a wonderful discussion. And as it is, there's a bunch of other authors to this book. And so we're going to bring them out over the course of this week and really have it out as far as media literacy is concerned.
Yeah, that's great. I look forward to talking about this and learning more. I mean, we all have a lot to learn about it. And I'd be the first to admit that I need to know a lot more as well. So I look forward to this.
Well, this will be fun, watching my teacher friend Barth get taught by some of these experts. One of our two other guests is Mickey Huff. He's a director of Project Censored and president of the nonprofit Media Freedom Foundation. Now, to date, Mickey has co-edited 15 editions of the project's yearbook, including most recently Project Censored State of the Free Press 2023, along with Andy Ross, who is another one of the authors who we'll be speaking to. Mickey, thank you so much for being here. We also have to say hello to one of your co-authors, and I assume colleague and perhaps friend, Nolan Higdon, author and university lecturer at Merrill College and the education department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Nolan, appreciate you being here as well.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you.
So Barth and I got this conversation started. We've been going at it now for quite a few months. I feel like this should be required for not only children, but for every single adult in this country, specifically ones who want to cast votes, because we're at a point, and I really want to kind of get into, some of the things people should be looking for, because, and Mickey, I'm going to start with you, because there's just something about you says I should start with Mickey. I think for some people, they look at media literacy and they're like, oh, all right, yeah, so the liberals are right and the conservatives are wrong. Media literacy, yeah, got it. Explain why that's not what this is.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, like many things in our society, there's a tendency to politically weaponize it, to ideologically divide around it. And often the thing that is the around it is something that is important to all of us. Being information literate, media literate, critically media literate, meaning interrogating the sources of information dissemination in a way that allows us to check it for veracity, to make sure that if it's news media, then it's checking the factual accuracy of the Fourth Estate, right? Because you just said a mouthful a minute ago about voting, being civically engaged, garbage in, garbage out. Being critically media literate is literally an individual and then hopefully societal antidote to falling prey to moral panics about fake news, mis and disinformation, relentless barrage of propaganda, all of which we're swimming in, by the way. But the quick fixes and the outsourcing of it is not the way to resolve those tensions. It's actually to start, and this is why the Media and Me, we all got together to write the Media and Me, because all of us individually, we started with 5 authors and then ballooned to 10 and an artist. It was to get as many different perspectives on what is important about critical media literacy. But most of us you got Ben Boynton on who taught high school, But many of us are teaching college, and Project Censored mostly deals with that group, that age group, and so on. And we're professors and so on. But all of us have recognized that we have to start teaching this at a younger age. And Nolan can talk about this at length with his background, but we have to start teaching people how to not just interact with media, but how to think critically, rationally, how to communicate, how to be empathic listeners. There's a whole host of things that are involved in being a critically media literate person that somehow interestingly translate into being a, sort of meaningfully civically engaged citizen in our society. And so the pointing of the fingers of it is actually, ironically, what the critical media literacy curriculum works to resolve. It's not something that should be weaponized. It's something that should be taught just like we teach math to young people. It's really that important and significant as a society, particularly in the digital media landscapes that we inhabit in the 21st century.
Nolan, do you want to kind of explain your background, which Mickey alluded to in his response?
Yeah, obviously I echo what Mickey says there, and I think the idea that media literacy is ideologically driven is highly misleading and absurd. I think people of all ideological backgrounds, they're interested in media. They're interested in interrogating media. We see this to some degree right now with conservatives' concerns about the power of Twitter or the power of government to work with digital media corporations. That's not a liberal perspective. That's conservatives who are fixated on that right now. So I think it's a way to demonstrate that across the ideological spectrum, we all know, power inequities or fake news are problems. The way that we don't solve those problems is by arguing about which side has it worse. The way we do solve that problem is by collectively addressing the problem. And that's what a media literacy is all about doing in the classroom. It's about saying, this is true, this is false, this is misleading, this is inaccurate. Or there can be a multitude of different interpretations about the same facts. That's totally fine. We're able to do that. The place we run into problems is when we have our own set of facts. That's where the problems start to lie.
Post-truth world, post-fact world.
There you go. Yes.
Yes.
I'll add my cliche. It's cliche now, I guess, for me anyway, because I use it all the time. Is if I get accused of trying to indoctrinate students into a certain political ideology when I teach media literacy, I say the only indoctrination as a teacher of English altogether is the indoctrinating kids into the ideology of critical thinking.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
Guilty as charged.
Exactly.
So, I often, when talking to people, I'm very much in the middle. I used to be pretty conservative growing up, and as I've gotten older and facts have become more obvious, it's been a little easier to stray a little more to the left. One of the things that I think really stands out, and again, this is one of those things Barth and I have talked a great deal about, is in recognizing not necessarily fake news, but news that's maybe a little suspect. Most of the facts are right, but I find it's funny. I was watching an old video that I did 5 years ago, and I was talking about Breitbart and their tendency in articles to say things like, many people are saying, which, I mean, all I need is for two of, or maybe all three of you to agree with me, and I could say many people agree with what I just said. That right, like that's not a source. That's not a news source. Yeah. You need actual confirmation from somebody of knowledge.
Some people say was the favorite at Fox. Fox was some people say, and that was an automatic sort of way that they could insert whatever perspective they wanted and pretend it was legitimate because somebody said it somewhere.
And they're not technically lying.
No, they're not technically lying, unlike the Dominion case. But
But to your point, I mean, that's where media literacy becomes very helpful. I think sometimes we skip an important step when we talk about fake news or disinformation, which is a lot of people don't know what journalism is or what journalists do. So before you can get into the fake version and propaganda and all the problems with it, and believe me, there are a ton, we've written books on them. You really have to stop and say, this is who journalists are. This is what their role is in this society. This is what ethical standards they're supposed to have. This is how they're supposed to report. To your point, they should have transparent sources. we should be able to see who these sources are. It shouldn't be some people say, it shouldn't be an anonymous source in most cases. There should be transparent sources that people can access. And that's why I like to tell people, I think at some level, we actually kind of have a quality problem. We do have a lot of disinformation, fake news out there. We also have a ton of great journalists doing great work. And so part of media literacy is figuring out, how do I sift through all this nonsense to find the great journalists? And I think that's a much more kind of robust, constructive approach at looking at disinformation than kind of lampooning one website or another.
And Joe, at Project Censored, that's exactly what we've done since 1976. Is we highlight the independent alternative journalists that are doing free press, fourth estate work, often without great budgets or exposure, but they do factual reporting, and they may even be biased. We're not saying that the independent media are objective, but the corporate media clearly is not. It certainly is not, though they masquerade as mainstream. That's part of their propaganda cover, is that they somehow speak for everybody and give both sides, even if there's 12 sides. The other thing that we do is that we are critical of corporate media, right? But we're also affirmative. We affirm not only independent, accurate reports, but when the New York Times or CNN or even Fox or whatever, if they report something that is factual, that is, sound journalism, we applaud that and say, why can't we do more like that? Why can't you have these great, vast resources to be channeled that way? One of the things we also do at Project Censored is analyze junk food news, sensational, trivializing nonsense that we can't turn away from Gwyneth Paltrow or Amber Heard or whatever, fill in the blanks, the Kardashians, stuff that gets passed off as news that really isn't for us as a society. And then there's something we call news abuse, Joe, that was tying into what you were saying before. It's when it's a form of propaganda and framing that presents a news story as an illegitimate way. It is factual insofar as it's being reported, but it is also distorted, out of context, or incomplete. So what's being presented may in fact not be quote unquote wrong, but the critically media literate element, the lens, allows us to ask the questions and allows us to see what's not being presented in a way that allows us to say, well, that's where your bias is coming through, New York Times. That's where your bias is coming through, Wall Street Journal. And then we learn from that. And we are able to teach students as a way of building trust with sources. And we get them away from the idea that one brand is always right and the other ones are the problem. And we start to realize that the problem is us. The problem is that we all have agendas and we all have biases. And once we destigmatize that and allow people to understand it in a meaningful way, it can be very empowering. And they can make better choices about the kind of media that they interact with, or even the kind of messaging that they project when they become the media.
Well, one of the benefits that I have in my particular situation, and it's unique, and I am very grateful, is that in addition to my media literacy elective, which I've been teaching at the high school level as an English class with a full English credit, I've been doing that since the mid-90s. And that I applauded to my district for doing that. I mean, I proposed the class. I started off, my first elective was journalism. I came into teaching from a public relations career of all things. And I was the editor-in-chief of my college newspaper for 3 semesters. So I did have that background, but I did PR for a number of years. And then I got into teaching, and I taught journalism as the first elective, and I still do that to this day. And the crossover between the two classes is obvious, although you're looking at it from the production side when you're a journalist. And I think high school kids don't really understand what goes into quality journalism, and the fact that it's not just getting both sides of the story, which is absolutely true, because there aren't just 2 sides to the story. This is another one of my mantras. There is, at least 3 sides to the story, one side, the other side, and then the truth, which is somewhere in the middle. You got to work all your sources, and you got to use your shoe leather, tactics. You got to use Goya journalism, Goya, get off your arse and go out there and knock on doors. And kids don't know that. They don't get that. And obviously adults don't understand that either. But from that basis, then kids understand that, what quality journalism is. And there's the crossover to media lit. From the media lit, obviously it's from the consumer side of things. But if a lot of the kids take both those classes, they can kind of see, oh yeah, well, I can tell that story is more balanced. That story is more factual as opposed to this story, because they understand what goes into the reporting from the get-go.
So Barth, that's what we try to wed in this book, right? We want to bring in media literacy, journalism, digital media, social media. We want to bring it all together. And in this book in particular, we did it with a collection of co-authors that was written to and for younger people, not at them and not about them. And that's a key distinction. And I think that's what makes the Media and Me book unique in that regard.
Right. And I would say that I'm guessing, I haven't read the book, I'm going to, but that a lot of the suggestions is having the kids create their own media so they understand where it comes from. And that's in my media literacy class, that's one of, whatever unit we're doing, that ultimately ends up being like one of our major projects, is having the kids create a newspaper or have them create an advertisement, whatever it happens to be, so that they understand from the perspective of the production side, well, how might it be slanted? And, how can I be fairer?
Yeah, I think that's really a great point, Barth, that a lot of media literacy educators talk about that. You can spend your time up there in front of the classroom talking about, the process of production and all the people who produce this text and all the self conflicts of interest they have in creating it. But it's very different when you have the student create the text, that they're empowered to make those decisions. And they start to realize how many decisions they make along the way in the media they're creating. The same thing happens into the media they're using. So that can be one of the most helpful lessons, to create a newspaper, create a video, create a podcast, whatever it may be.
Do you, after they've created it, reviewed it, are you able to show them, watch it back with them and show them maybe where their own media bias rears its ugly head in what they're creating?
Well, from my perspective, one of the indicators in the rubric that is the media literacy principles. Did your project exhibit the media literacy principles that we learned in this unit? And so when they get their assessment, they depending on the project, they might have to project it in class, and therefore, yes, we can talk about it at that point. If it's a written project or whatever, unless they're going to make a presentation, they do, at least from my own assessment, my written assessment, they understand, what principles were they able to demonstrate, what principles might they have missed. So that feedback element is very important too. You're right, Joe.
Yeah, the assignments we do, for project censored work, which is mostly college, but it does go into high school. They're researching independent sources. They're learning how to write accurate summaries. They're interrogating for bias and omission. And then they're taking that and looking across the corporate media and surveying it for coverage, for bias and omission as well. And so it's not the same as them per se creating their own news broadcast, but it's the type of assignment that we call validated independent news stories that allows them to see, not only detect in others, but see what's missing. And it gets students, I think, it gives them the opportunity to broaden their media diet and expand the palette of sources that they consider. And that we think that is a big step in the right direction in becoming what we call being a media literate citizen.
I actually have a question for Mickey and Nolan. With college students, I'm just wondering, what level of media literacy understanding do you typically see? Does it run the spectrum? Most high school students I see are I don't want to disparage them, but they're clueless when they enter my classroom. So I'm wondering if what is there a difference at the high school level, or more of a willingness to look at it, or how what do you see?
I can't. I can't really compare the two directly because I teach in higher ed. But I think all students come to our classes with some level of media literacy. It may not be the type of media literacy we want, but they know how to use these platforms. They know how to use these devices. They know how to create and communicate. And so in that sense, you're not teaching those things in many cases. The students come with that. But digging deeper into those critical questions, that there is some negotiation there for a lot of these students, very younger students in particular. These phones are very important. These are support networks. We have studies show that they can't fall asleep without it there. They need their phone there. So this is something very important to them. And if you come out on the protectionist attack on them, you're not going to reach students. It's not good sound pedagogy. So reminding them that it's okay to get pleasure from media. We all do, right? We all watch movies and TV shows and go to websites that we just simply do because we enjoy it. It's a pleasure thing. It's not for our job. It's it's something we get pleasure from. So reminding them that that's okay, while also empowering them to make determinations. That's what Media and Me is all about. There's no page in the book that says you need to turn off your devices or stop using them, or this platform's bad or this one's good. Instead, it's empowering to say, like, look, you can reframe your own relationship with media. So, do you like how much you use media? Are you getting from it what you want? Are the risks worth the reward? Those asking those kinds of questions of themselves helps them, I think, be in a better position to kind of tackle some of the things you're talking about, Barth. Where otherwise, they sort of think it's all or none, right? Like the platform is this way, this is my relationship. We try and say, like, slow down, think about that relationship. You have the power to renegotiate this with the platform.
Yeah, and Barth, just to the same point, I also don't teach high school, but I chair journalism and history at a community college. I've taught at different universities. It's interesting because some of the people coming in, they've never really heard of some of the terms or some of the things that we're discussing, but they immediately start to see the application. Right. They start putting, and in the Media and Me, we actually have a really convenient glossary in the back with a lot of jargon and terms. We have call out boxes and lists of things. The whole last chapter is a guide of 10 strategies, right? 10 guiding strategies for using media and using the lessons in the book. So we want to give people things so they can go and do this and embody it and be more self-empowered the way that they use media rather than allowing media to use them. And that's a really good, I think that's a one of the stronger points of the book. But it's interesting too, because coming into the college classroom, you get a variety of different people at different knowledge bases. And so sometimes the people that come in and have a lot of experience with media, and I mean, teaching history, there's people that have more knowledge about certain things. It's sometimes those folks that are most jarred by the critical media literacy talk because they thought they understood or knew something because they read the New York Times, or they got both sides from CNN or whatever and Fox. And it's sometimes harder to crack those minds open to get them to relearn, not necessarily unlearn, but relearn and rethink the way they interact with media in a way that is broader and is more diverse. That's also not finger wagging at them, saying like, you've done it all wrong. In this book, The Media and Me, an interesting thing that we've noticed is that while we did write it for younger people, we didn't write down to young people. We wrote up to young people. And if you're writing up to anybody, it has the possibility that anybody along the way can pick it up and learn something. And I've given copies to various teachers and people using it in class. But the thing that struck me most, Joe and Barth, is that the teachers themselves were like, I got to tell you, there were a lot of things in this book that I didn't really know until I read it. Right. And so I think the book is very unique in that way, is that it's accessible to many different people from many different backgrounds who have many different knowledge bases, as well as simultaneously being a great vehicle and an introduction for young people.
What do you, general question, are you optimistic in general about the future of media literacy education in this country? You've written this book, you've spent a lot of time, talked to a lot of different people that are in the media literacy education field. Is there optimism out there that, people are going to get it, that we're going to, start instilling this? I mean, there's maybe 3 states right now that have some form of a graduation requirement linked to media lit. And, it's a start, but I mean, what's your level of optimism?
I'm pretty optimistic, honestly. I publicly noted my opposition to Donald Trump, but I will thank Donald Trump for feeding into the moral panic over fake news, because all of a sudden the work that I and others had done, and Project Censor for decades by that point, now all of a sudden got a lot more attention thanks to this moral panic. And to your point, Barth, there's not a lot of required media literacy because of our weird decentralized American education system. But at least rhetorically, almost all 50 states have now put in some way of adding media literacy to the curriculum, which it doesn't solve the problem, but it's a major step from where we were, think like 1993 or something like that, that now all these states at least have it on their radar. There also, is a lot of great work being done by people in the critical space, not just us in this call, but many of our co-authors are associated with a ton of orgs that are doing it. But I do think one of the complications, the only thing I guess that makes me somewhat skeptical is there are a lot of people promoting media literacy who have a different definition than us of media literacy. These are your Facebooks, Googles, Nickelodeons, New York Times, et cetera, which have much more kind of establishment version of it. Then there's political ideologues who are creating platforms. There's people from the Pentagon who are creating media literacy. Like NATO and the Atlantic Council. So the popularity is a good thing in that it gives us a window, but there are new threats that we also need to be cognizant of as well.
Yeah, the whole field of media literacy is, as Nolan suggested, is it's really expanded and blown up a lot, in the last 6-7 years. But it's also shined important light on the differences of media scholars, meaning critically media literate scholars versus acritical media scholars versus industry people promoting their own brand of media literacy, or ideological organizations like NATO or the Atlantic Council or NewsGuard, which is more the sort of techno version of like what's good news and what's not, what's red flag or green. And, and we try to call that out. Part of being critically media literate means being aware of the differences in media literacy education itself pedagogically. And there's a lot of folks that are acritical that they look at what we're trying to do and they say, well, you're trying to politicize this and you're politicizing young people. And it's like, no, they'll politicize themselves on their own. We're simply giving them the skill sets to ask the right kinds of questions, to develop their relationship with sources on their own without me having to green flag it or red flag it for them. That's their job, not mine. My job is to help teach them how to get there, to be more self-reliant and to be a more responsible media citizen. That's the difference between critical media scholars and other groups peddling other brands or gadgets or software or devices that we're frankly a bit suspect of.
Right. So the critical media literacy approach is a very meta approach. It's, you question. Part of being media literate is questioning what is media literacy.
That is right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
No, that's correct. But to Barth, that's like a radical statement in a lot of education circles.
Watch yourself, Barth.
Yeah, I know. Say that. You get a lot of pushback from folks who think that you shouldn't be questioning that process.
It seems to me that right-wing and or conservative media is concerned about people being more media literate, sort of like, and it kind of goes hand in hand with how the right wing wants less people to vote, right? And the left wing wants more people to vote because they all assume everyone that's not voting would vote Democrat, right? And we don't know that. And it kind of is the same thing here where like they don't want you to be media literate because, and I think both sides kind of think this, then they'll figure out which of the sides is full of crap.
Well, Joe, the Democrats were flogging media literacy during the Trump years, and now the Republicans are flogging it during the Biden years. So maybe there's part of the answer to that question. They're both disingenuous about the reality of the importance of it. They're only weaponizing, ideologically using it as ways to benefit their own agendas, which might sound cynical, but it's not. It means that we're skeptical of their interest in something that can benefit all of us societally, because they're only in favor of it if they get to control how it's wheeled out and used. And critical media literacy doesn't allow itself to be used or co-opted because, back to your point about being meta, Barth, it is what it is. It gives you the tools, it provides you the questions, it gives you suggestions, and it waits for you to decide the things that you do based on your conclusions that you can then communicate back, rationally argue, transparently source, right? It kind of takes on its own ecosystem where we'll have the red, the blue, maybe you got the purple. But in this case, it's basically like the rainbow. It's basically like, no, there's many, many, many different things going on here, and we can all benefit from them if we can get outside of our own silos, get outside of our binary us them kind of thinking, and begin to really model what free press is supposed to be doing in our society. It's supposed to be meaningfully, factually informing its citizens about the most important issues of the day so that they can be civically engaged in ways that maximize their self-governance.
Yeah. And that's what critical media literacy focuses so much on issues of power. So we can, we can agree, we would love an ideal world where disinformation didn't exist or hate speech didn't exist. And that's great. But then the problem comes like, well, who or what do you want to empower to eradicate those things? Like, who do you trust to have the power to dictate what we can and can't see? And that's where the devil's in the details. I would not recommend trusting any political party. I wouldn't recommend trusting any government or industry to regulate information for you. So in that sense, critical media literacy is the best approach. It's empowering you to make these determinations. And once you become critically media literate, one of the things you find almost immediately is that you've angered people across the ideological spectrum, because you can go off about MSNBC for as long as you can go off about Fox News. I mean,
and we have.
Yeah. So the idea of playing to the left or playing to the right, that all becomes kind of, just for entertainment and show. Really being media literate is about tackling these issues across the ideological spectrum.
And I think that, you mentioned the ideological spectrum and the polarized world in which we live right now, which I believe is largely exacerbated by social media. Number one, it makes it more complicated, but number two, I think it makes it much more relevant, the whole concept of critical media literacy. As I think Nolan said earlier, I've never felt that I've taught a class that became more relevant every year that I teach it. And I think it's largely due to our polarized country, more so than I can remember in my adult life. And so having that perspective of being critically media literate and asking the questions and getting into the depth, it's much more complicated, but it's really the only way we're going to get any sense of understanding.
Well, that's what Nolan and I did in United States of Distraction. That book we did for City Lights about media manipulation in post-truth America and what we can do about it was written through a critical media literacy lens. I mean, that's what we were looking at, is how has neoliberalism and educational policy and consolidated corporate media and big tech really just shrunk our so-called public square and made more myopic, more visceral, but myopic our ideological kind of possibilities and differences. And Nolan and I went on to write Let's Agree to Disagree, a critical thinking textbook that a lot of that stuff ended up in the Media and Me. We just repackaged it and put it in a different language so it could be experienced by a much broader audience, because we think this is too important. This is too important to be made into some snobbish, elitist academic discipline. It's too important to have hide away in the academic journals that nobody reads. No offense to people that publish in them. Nolan has a lot. We all have. But this is an important thing that anybody can do and anybody can know. And everybody, I think, needs to know a little bit more than they know about it already.
Yeah. Mickey, let me ask you this, though, because, there's an attitude amongst a lot of people in society that being smart or being educated is bad, or that you think it makes you special because you're an elite, you're so smart. How do you emphasize to stupid people that they need to understand what's going on out there? How do you?
The Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a powerful thing, but it works both ways. Yeah, because there's also this general assumption in the ivory tower and in the liberal institutions like the New York Times and so on, that the country bumpkin or the Fox News watcher, the MAGA hat wearer, is an ignoramus, and we have nothing in common with them. In fact, Hillary Clinton referred to them as deplorables, which might have been, one of the biggest downfall moments of her campaign, in ways where you're just really writing off vast swaths of people where that label it's a crude instrument, just like the ivory tower one is, and just like the smart people have all the answers. Nolan and I have filled books. Our other co-authors have filled books with ways that the intelligentsia has gotten things wrong. Hello, Iraq War. So it's important to recognize that those labels serve more to distract and divide people than actually understand them by exaggerating caricatures of other groups and people rather than really sitting down to talk to your neighbor, really sitting down to talk to the person next to you. Let's say, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, but let's say I have a neighbor that had Trump flags, and I have another neighbor that has a coexist and Hillary, forever bumper sticker. How do I talk to both of those people and find the commonalities and really sit down to get past all this armor, right? And part of this divisive media, it's what it does. It calluses people. It makes them build armor, and it makes them cynically suspect of their own neighbors, right? Nolan and I are quick to say that America's number one fear isn't nuclear holocaust. It's not the EPA disasters. It's not all that. It's other Americans. It's each other. And part of the reason for that is that we have been foisted into this like 3-ring circus wrestling match with each other, where politics has been turned into a total spectacle, even more so than it was historically through media and anti-social media, right? Social media. But I think it's important that we call out those stereotypes. It sometimes is easier for me to meet. I grew up in a working class family in Pennsylvania. Nolan grew up in a working class family too. It's sometimes easier for me to talk to conservative people that live in rural communities because I'm looking for a way to connect. I can connect to people who are liberal and elite because I learned the language, but I'm not from that pedigree. I didn't go to Yale or Harvard, and I teach at a community college. So, I mean, as much as, the right would say I'm indoctrinating the youth, I wish I were so lucky. I'm not, if I'm indoctrinating anybody, I'm going to steal your line, Barth. If I'm indoctrinating anybody with anything, it's to try to get them to understand the importance of critical and independent thinking. And critical media literacy, I think, is a great vehicle to that end. And that's what we hope to encapsulate in our books, in our work, and in our curriculum.
And we, to some degree brought this up in the United States of Distraction. But if you're part of an institution like journalism, news media, or higher ed, and people don't trust you and don't like you, that's probably has more to do with you than them. I think there needs to be a lot of self-reflection amongst journalists and a lot of self-reflection amongst the elites in higher ed. And yes, I'm talking about myself and all those who publish in the space. What have we done to lose this trust? And I think, at least in a higher ed context, 30, 40 years ago, higher ed moved away from being a public good and tried more to be a vocational institution, to sell the invisible product of a job for many students who, they didn't want to read like Thoreau. They want, a job that pays well. So they're coming in there. And so the institution, at least from the public's perspective, doesn't serve the public good like it once did. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect upon and act upon to build that bridge that Mickey's talking about with those who have such disdain for higher ed.
I think one of the things that I thought about when Mickey was talking about, how do we bridge the gap between these two different people? And I think it a lot of ways comes down to language. And that, that's one of my units in both journalism and media literacy is language, and the power of language to mislead. And, we talk about doublespeak and, the use of jargon, the use of inflated language, the use of gobbledygook, and how, people in power typically use this kind of language to separate, to gain control. And, it starts with labels, the fact that we separate each other into liberal and conservative. And I mean, quite frankly, what exactly is a conservative anymore in America, right? I mean, all conservative means is I'm not liberal, I'm on the other side, So if kids understand what these labels mean, and that words have power, and, words have underlying kind of intentions, that's a starting point anyway, to so we're all speaking the same language, so to speak.
So Barth, let me ask you this then, since you're teaching high school, and it's funny that around this time of the year, maybe you guys have seen the meme about how lucky we are to all know the Pythagorean theorem as opposed to how to file our own taxes, right? Would have been much more useful information. Now, your class, Barth, is elective, and so I would assume kids that are looking to take your class, again, would be people more likely to be into the news, again, whether it be left or right, but that's where they go. Here's where I get worried, and heading into community college, junior college, or college level, is once you get there, you see this comment on social media all the time where someone's like, I watch CNN, I watch Fox, I did my own research, and I came to this conclusion. And I think to myself, do you know there's methods to research? Because people say they did their own research, and you gentlemen, having studied and worked your way, understand that there are research methods, and I feel like maybe that's an area where Barth's group, the high school teachers, we should be teaching kids how to do research, and I don't think that that's happening.
I'm not going to speak for all of high school in America, nor can I even speak for all of high school where I teach. But I agree that, unfortunately, and Nolan made this point too, we have such a variety of decentralized school systems and curricula, and they each come with their own set of mandates, usually from the state level. And we need more civics education, so we have to do this. In philosophy, Joe, I agree with you 100%. I mean, that's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching media literacy, is because you can really, the core of the class is, as both Nolan and Mickey would say, is asking questions, and then knowing, whom to ask those questions, which is all part of the research process. So I know that, there's some level of that takes place in media literacy, and my AP language and composition, that's basically what it's all about, is, you need to understand what is persuasion, and what is effective persuasion, and what rhetorical techniques are used to make a claim and to support a claim. So that it does happen at the high school level. I will speak for both my English department and our history department. We're pretty strong into teaching writing and teaching the research process. So it's there. I just think there's just so many variations across this state and across the country that
they should make it mandatory and call it how to not sound like an idiot on social media. Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Nolan.
I was just going to say, I mean, I'll say this quickly, Mickey, but it speaks to what Barth is saying there. We don't have a lot of national education policy for good reason. We like to keep it decentralized, but oddly, when we do get a big national movement, it tends to really stupefy the education. This is your No Child Left Behind, your Common Core. And let's remember history here. No Child Left Behind was introduced as a civil rights bill. That's what this was actually introduced as. It turned out to be an anti-teacher bill that was there to break unions and stupefy education down to multiple choice tests. So it's not only about sort of saying like, what should teachers be teaching? We also have to empower teachers to be able to make these decisions. A lot of educators, the folks who are in the classroom doing the work, they have very little say, unfortunately, what goes on campus. So, someone who's a very talented educator can't just say, I'm going to teach research methods, because they have, this litany of requirements and tests they have to get through. And I think that's one of the major problems that hamstrings a lot of our educators from doing the great work they're capable of.
And Joe, real quickly, since you mentioned Pythagoras and taxes, notice that one of those things is far more digestible than the other. The Pythagorean theorem can be taught and understood, and people can utilize it, whereas the tax code is written by design for certain groups to use Nolan's term, stupefy the rest of us. That's by design. And so part of being critically media literate is to see power structure and to see what was behind No Child Left Behind, what is behind the media literacy bill that someone's trying to pass. What, again, it's applicable across the spectrum. What you're getting at, though, is a far greater indictment of what's happened to public education, is that it's turned more into about regurgitation than about critical thought. It's more about churning out buckrakers than muckrakers. It's more about trying to see a means to an end than being a journey. you know, in a lot of ways. And that's part of what critical media literacy, I think, reinfuses into the educational dialogue, is it reminds us in a way where because as Nolan started by saying, we love media, we get pleasure from it, we interact with it, and it is us, the media and me, right? It's us. And so I think it's really important that we can utilize critical media literacy pedagogy to really remind people that we need to be asking these critical questions about what we are and are not being taught in schools. We need to be thinking, just because something's not on the test doesn't mean it isn't important, right? We need to really encourage, and we're back now to Barth's term of the use of the term meta, right? We need a meta-analysis of what's happening in our classrooms and what's happened to public education policy in this country. And I think critical media literacy pedagogy is a great avenue to do it.
I would just say that's, again, I'm kind of repeating what I said before, but one of the absolute joys I have in teaching media literacy is the freedom. I mean, it's my curriculum, and it's English. I have to make sure that the kids are reading and writing, so it's an English class. But that's easy. But as far as the curriculum, it's all up to me, and so my creativity, and I don't get that in other classes. And there's so much focus at the high school level on the SAT now. It's how we measure how kids learn. It's how we measure how kids are, or how schools are successful or not. And it's just.
But more and more colleges aren't requiring those tests. And, and by the way, Barth, if you don't have a copy of this, please send us your address. We'll send it over right away.
I will.
We'd love to hear what you think of it. And we'd love to hear ways that you might want to use it in your classroom, how you see fit and how you can adapt things from it. That's partly how we wrote this book. And it's very diverse. I know Nolan and I are two white guys, but the book is written by 11 very diverse people, diverse looking, diverse sounding, diverse in their interests, diverse in a lot of ways that really is why we celebrate diversity. Mm-hmm. And part of that too, we hope other people will take it and they will get certain things from the book that they can take and they can grow into part of their curriculum in ways that go far beyond what we could in one book. And we have a study guide and so forth, but we see this as a kernel. We see it as a foundation, and we want our creative, industrious, and intrepid teachers to take it and run with it.
I'm looking forward to it.
Would this book be useful for an adult, say 75, my mom?
Yep.
Would this book do her some good? My mom's going to watch this, no doubt about it. And Barth, this has been my issue for some time. It's become Barth's over the last 6 months or so. Barth trying to help me help my mom.
Yeah.
My mom says things to me. My mom fell into the Fox News. I don't know if it's the blue or what. I'm not sure what's happened to her. My mom went to Woodstock in 69. I don't know how she got glued to Fox.
Natural progression. You just come out on the other side. You got a full circle.
But she says things. She's like, I just never know what's true and what's false anymore. Are we supposed to fact check everything? And I said, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think, I mean, and I'm glad you pointed this out, because one of the misconceptions is that the digital disinformation is a young person problem, but people of all ages struggle with this issue. But one of the things I'm most proud of about participating in the Media and Me book is how accessible it is to any audience. And I really have to credit some of our younger writers, some of our undergrads and graduate students. They really spent some time to make us kind of think about, are you guys trying to talk to other academics, or do you actually want to talk to the general population? They really forced us to wrestle with that question, as did Publisher as well. And so ultimately, the end result, I'm very happy with. I think you can give this book to anyone, and it's accessible. I think it's very clearly laid out too. So if you just want to immediately buzz to the news chapter, you can. If you want to go to the digital media chapter, you can. So I would say, yes, it's hugely acceptable to all audiences.
Yeah, it's true. And, Dan Simon at 7 Stories, we're at Censored Press. Ruth Weiner is also 7 Stories and Triangle Square. Their input and the young author's input really made this a better, more rounded, more diverse book. And Joe's mom let us know. We'll send you a copy, and we'd love to hear what you think about it.
We'll sign it.
We'll sign it to you. I mean, seriously,
great.
it's got a great, I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, it's got a fantastic glossary. It's got call out questions that are very much written in a way that treats young people as young adults, not as kids. Right. And there's you can. And again, I said this before, several folks that we've given this to that are teachers, they kind of came back and they were like, I learned a lot of stuff by going through this book, things that they maybe took for granted or, and it's written in a way that's not pointy head. It's not condescending. It's written as a conversation, and the readers are part of the conversation. So Joe's mom, we want to hear what you have to think about it.
She'll love that. She will love that. I can guarantee it.
Joe's mom is right. We're living in an epistemic crisis. The post-truth world has been unleashed upon us by design so that we can just go to our own comfortable red or blue silo and say, forget the other side. And that is a recipe for disaster. It's inaction. Democracy is not a spectator sport, period. Right. And we need to be informed to be meaningfully involved. And we think that this book really is a great primer and foundation to lay other kind of civic information, historical information. We think it's an integral part of a broad and diverse curriculum. And we think that it has potential to be adopted far and wide for people to take it where they think it should go.
Nolan Higdon, author and university lecturer. I know, Nolan, you got to go. You got to actually go teach. So off you go. You go do that. I appreciate your time and all of your insight and your input on this. Maybe we'll have you back in the future. We could talk a little bit more about this.
I hope so. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Nolan.
Our pleasure. Well, gentlemen, wow, this was, I got to tell you, Mickey, I like Barth. I do a radio show. I do this TV program. Barth is one of my favorite people to speak to. He's a really smart guy. And now I've met you, and I know you don't teach at an Ivy League college. You sure look like an Ivy League professor. You've got that look down to you. I love it.
I won't take that as an insult, but I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate being invited into these spaces to have these conversations. You two are very well informed. You're very passionate about the same things that we are. And we just want to expand the dialogue and every corner. That's where it needs to be happening. And we not only to the corners, but we need to shine the spotlights into the corners and bring them all to the center stage. We need to all be dealing with these things. I also have a weekly radio show. We do documentary films. We write books. We do a whole lot of things that your viewers, your audience can check out for free at projectcensored.org, censoredpress.org. You can get the study guides for free. We can send exam copies to interested teachers. We're getting more and more school districts to adopt the book, which is absolutely amazing. And we just hope that this is the beginning of that process. And we're more than happy to come on and talk with you all again anytime about the work we do. And we're more than willing to do workshops and talk and meet with you and expand our network. And so we're really happy that you invited us into your home. And we want to let you know that you're also vice versa. You're invited back.
Oh, that's excellent. Mickey Huff, Director of Project Censored and the President of the nonprofit Media Freedom Foundation. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. Really cool guy. That was a ton of fun, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciated it as well. I had a blast, Joe and Barth. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
We'll talk soon. Well, Barth Keck, again, I don't want to carry on for too much about.
No, you know what, Joe? I would like to talk now about Leslie Stahl's interview of MTG last night on 60 Minutes. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm sure we could break this down from a critical media literacy perspective. I mean,
I wanted to actually bring her up, and I thought, how much does she keep your class relevant for as long as, say, she and Lauren Boebert stay in politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, they mentioned Donald Trump before. I mean, regardless of one's political orientation, Donald Trump has done wonders for, the importance of showing the importance of media literacy, and they're just continuing the legacy. So,
yeah. Oh boy, she she really is something else. Again, I hate this post-truth world that we live in. It for somebody like me who thrives on facts, who strayed from the Republican Party because of their disassociation with facts. That kind of stuff just drives me crazy. I fight and argue with people about it all the time because I think they can do better. I think right-wing media can do better. And again, like I just said with these two gentlemen, it seems to me they don't want you to know how to be media literate because it would be bad news for them.
Right. They can do better. And, for that matter, so can some of the left-wing media do better as well. But, to the point that those gentlemen made, I don't know that they want to, because, that's not their MO. That's not how they maintain their power and their profit margins. And that is another thing that we're fighting against when we're trying to teach media literacy.
I know how much you dislike social media. We've gotten into it many a times. Your dislike of social media and how destructive it has been, not only to society, but just to human development, human interaction, right? It's changed a generation into something we weren't before in, simpler times.
Absolutely. And the sad part about all that is that it didn't have to be that way. And there are still many positive benefits of social media. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten together in the first place without social media. And, everybody that you talk to on this show, I think, is a result of something that someone might have posted on Twitter. And it has, for my media literacy class, there's nothing better than providing a variety of resources. And so social media can absolutely be a positive tool, but unfortunately, this gets back to the same points that we're making before. Depending on the platform and depending on what's allowed, it's not going to happen. If it's more profiting to have people say crazy things, then that's what they're going to do, because that's going to get more clicks and that's going to get more attention. So yeah, it's unfortunate. As much as I do see the benefits of social media, I just wonder sometimes if we could pull the plug on it all and just go back to simpler times. And I know it was different and they had their own agenda, but we talked to the era of Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News, 1968, voted the most trusted man in America. In as much as CBS Evening News had its own biases, at least things were a lot simpler back then.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how far we've gone and how far we've come. Before I let you go, your Baltimore Orioles had a disaster of a game the other night. 2 outs, fly ball to left field at Fenway.
What are you doing?
Your defensive replacement left fielder drops the ball. Next thing you know, 2-run homer. Does it feel like it's same old Orioles?
You had to bring that up.
I had to.
Same old Orioles. No, it felt like last year they were like several games out of the wild card. The Orioles from 3 or 4 years ago, yes. Although I will just say, as I've and again, this is one of the things I do like about Twitter in particular, is you get into the whole Oriole conversation, and that at least it's professional sports. It's not going to bring down our nation, and so you can have a little fun with it, and so that's fun. And what you're doing to me right now is fun for you, but
100%.
But I just my canned response at this point is it's a long season, right? It's a long season. We're talking 3 games in, Joe. Come on, we got a long way to go.
It's a good attitude to have. Again, appreciate you coming on here to do this. I know we've got a few more of these, part of the 5-part media literacy series. Barth, I really appreciate it. I think we got another one. We'll get back to this tomorrow. Very much looking forward to that. Again, follow this guy on Twitter. He's a great follow, but if for nothing else, to get to his articles, because again, I just love reading everything you write, Barth. So again, love having you on. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Have an awesome day.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate it.
You got it, my friend. And that is going to do it for this episode. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Like I said, we still have 3 more parts to our 5-part series. You can visit ctpolitics.tv if you haven't caught the initial couple of interviews. That is going to do it for us. Make sure you tune in every weeknight at 5 o'clock. On Roku, Amazon, all the smart TVs. You could find Connecticut Politics TV. I'm Joe McGuire. That's going to do it for us. Have a great night, and thanks for watching.